Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bobby Donaldson, professor of history at the University of South Carolina, where I direct the Center for Civil Rights History and Research. I'm also a founding member and lead scholar for Columbia SC 63, Our Story Matters. Today, we gather at a historic intersection in Columbia to acknowledge and to commemorate an extraordinary turning point in the history of this city, this state, and this nation. At this hour, March 2nd, 1961, 60 years ago, hundreds of African-American students departed the Zion Baptist Church. They marched to the streets of this city with their minds set on arriving at the state capitol. They wanted to escalate the fight against injustice and racial discrimination in this nation. They came in many directions. Some came down Sumter Street. Some came down Main Street. Some came upward from Gervais Street. Law enforcement were overwhelmed by what they saw. They had never seen anything like it. When they gathered at this intersection 60 years ago, they were told they could march around the State House one time in silence. But as they marched, a Benedict College theology student named the Reverend David Carter said, "Let your conscience be your guide." And when he said those words, those students who gathered in silence broke out in song and dance, and they were arrested for a breach of peace. That arrest 60 years ago became the basis of a landmark United States Supreme Court case, Edwards versus South Carolina. So today we gather at this intersection to acknowledge an extraordinary moment and some brave individuals who were part of that gathering. When they gathered here 60 years ago, there was no Confederate flag on the State House dome. When the Supreme Court ruled in 1963, a Confederate flag joined the state flag and the United States flag. When they gathered here 60 years ago, they were called outside agitators, even though they were from Greenwood, Greenville, Charleston, Columbia, and Newberry. When they gathered here 60 years ago, a young photographer named Cecil Williams took their photographs. Today, he's still taking photographs and has a Civil Rights Museum in Orangeburg. When they gathered 60 years ago, a young photographer whose name was Jim Covington. Jim Covington stood on this corner 60 years ago taking photographs like this one, March 2nd, 1961. And here we are 60 years later, and I'm looking at Jim Covington right now, taking photographs yet again. When they gathered 60 years ago, the mayor of the city of Columbia told them they were not welcome on the State House grounds. The governor told them the same. And so it's ironic now that we gather here on March 2nd, 2021, to hear words of welcome from a mayor who looked just like the students who gathered here 60 years ago. Please join me in welcoming our mayor, Stephen Benjamin.
I had to take a moment to tell Dr. Donaldson, Professor Donaldson, my friend Bobby, just how proud and thankful we are for him and his amazing leadership. He often tells a story of me calling him in 2012, was it, Bobby? 2012, I was at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. with the mayors of Jackson, Mississippi, and Birmingham, Alabama, and others, and we were talking about this opportunity in 2013 to recognize similar moments in each of our respective cities, the 50th anniversary of what might have happened in 1963. And I was a student of history. I knew some things. It was important to me to understand my history and my past. But Bobby is always on some amazingly next level. And he began to tick off to me all the wonderful things that happened in 1963. And we focused for a moment on Edwards versus South Carolina. And many of you know, because you love this city the way that I do, you love the state the way that I do, that oftentimes when people speak of the most important moments in the history of civil rights, they mention Selma and Birmingham and Atlanta and Memphis and everywhere else, but they never mention the wonderful things and incredible leadership we saw in Columbia and Greenville and Orangeburg and Charleston. And we know, indeed, the sacrifices of seemingly ordinary people who did extraordinary things that made our lives today incredibly possible. And today, we have an opportunity to give some folks their flowers right now while they're here, not long after they're gone. And it is my honor to be here representing the people of Columbia and welcoming some of the 187 right back here to this very same place. It is indeed an honor to serve here not only as the African seed and the American son, but as a proud Colombian, as a proud South Carolinian. And I would tell you, this journey we've been on the last several years has only just begun. We have some amazing things still yet to do, and we'll do them together. Thank you, and God bless you. I will say this as well. Dr. Donaldson mentioned the fact that we weren't welcomed by the mayor or the governor at that time, and we weren't even welcomed by the chief of police, but right now the chief of police is right here with us. Chief Holbrook, thank you for your leadership, and to all the leadership at the City of Columbia for all that we do together. God bless you.
"60 years ago, among those who were arrested on March 2nd, 1961, was a 20-year-old student from South Carolina State College in Orangeburg. His name was James E. Clyburn. Congressman Clyburn very much wanted to be here today, but is unable to be here because of business in Washington. But today he is reading a resolution on the floor of the United States House of Representatives, which reads in part, 60 years ago, a student-led march took place in South Carolina's state capital, protesting state laws designed to maintain de jure segregation of blacks and whites in my home state. That arrest that day, March 2nd, 1961, resulted in the landmark Supreme Court case, Edwards versus South Carolina. Madam Speaker, I ask that you and my colleagues to join me today in recognizing the contributions of the student protesters in Edwards versus South Carolina as we remember their protests 60 years ago. As one of the young people involved in this historic event, I can attest that we were committed to the fight for civil rights and had no idea that our actions would contribute to preserving the right to peacefully protest for future generations. Today, similar tactics are being employed in movements like Black Lives Matter. I applaud their efforts and thank the City of Columbia and the University of South Carolina for the monument they have erected to memorialize this momentous event. Today, to bring remarks on behalf of the House of Representatives, I am pleased to introduce Representative Leola Robinson Simpson, who was in 1961 the state president of the Youth College Division of the NAACP. 60 years later, she is the Honorable Representative Leola Robinson Simpson of Greenville, who will bring remarks on behalf of the General Assembly, Senator Jackson, is unable to be with us today and expresses his regrets. As Representative Robinson Simpson comes forward, you should note that on March 2nd, 1961, all members of the General Assembly were white. All members of the General Assembly were men. God moves in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform. One of the wonders, Leola Robinson Simpson.
And on this day, we know that we still shall overcome. Repeat after me. We shall overcome. We shall still overcome. 60 years ago, I was a 16-year-old high school student from the venerable Sterling High School in Greenville, South Carolina. And I was among over 100 students who came to Columbia on that day to put an end to the rancid desegregation efforts that were taking place at that time. And now, on behalf of the South Carolina House of Representatives and the Senate, I would ask all members of the General Assembly to come forward at this time and join me as I read this resolution. To recognize and honor the students and leaders of the civil rights struggle in South Carolina, and to commemorate the 60th anniversary of the landmark United States Supreme Court case Edwards versus South Carolina. This landmark case protects the First Amendment rights of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. Whereas on March 2nd, 1961, more than 300 college and high school students from Columbia, Charleston, Greenville, Orangeburg, Sumter, and other cities and their adult advisors joined in a planned march from Mother Zion Baptist Church, 801 Washington Street, to the South Carolina State House to protest the purpose to submit a protest to the citizens of South Carolina and the state legislature our feelings and our dissatisfaction with the present condition of discriminatory action against Negroes. Whereas the students walked peaceably and orderly in two wide columns from the church to the State House grounds and then around the Capitol building that holds the governor's office and legislators' offices. The march was originally planned as a silent protest, but encouraged by Benedict College theology student David Carter. The students clapped their hands and they sang patriotic songs such as the Star Spangled Banner and religious songs such as We Shall Not Be Moved. Right. Whereas the students were directed to disband and leave the grounds by law enforcement officers, and they were threatened with arrest for breach of peace despite their peaceful and orderly demonstrations. When they declined to leave, police arrested 190 students, 187 were tried in magistrate court. They were convicted and fined for breach of peace, and the students appealed. Whereas the 187 defendants were NAACP leader and future South Carolina State Senator, the Reverend Isaiah DeQuincy Newman, Dr. Benjamin Glover, pastor of Charleston's Mother Emanuel AME Church, future United States Congressman James E. Clyburn, and future South Carolina State Representative Leola Clement Robinson. Then the state NAACP president, the first defendant was Benedict College student James Edwards Jr. And whereas the Supreme Court heard the arguments in the case Edwards versus South Carolina on December the 13th, 1962, from Columbia to Washington, D.C., the students relied on the legal work of the famed attorney Matthew J. Perry, Lincoln C. Jenkins, and Donald James Sampson. The case was argued before the United States Supreme Court by NAACP Legal Defense Fund Director Jack Greensburg, who said the Edwards case was indeed a jewel because of the painstaking preparation and fearless, unrelenting courtroom work of Perry, Jenkins, and Sampson. Stick with me, I'm almost done, but this is historic.
Amen.
Whereas on February 25th, 1963, in an 8-1 decision, the United States Supreme Court overturned the convictions and affirmed peaceful student demonstrations, concluding that the 1961 arrest of participants violated constitutionally protected rights of assembly and the freedom to petition for redress of grievances. That court's landmark decision ruled that the 14th Amendment of our Constitution forbids a state to make criminal the peaceful expression of unpopular views. Writing that decision, Justice Potter Stewart said, the circumstances in this case reflect an exercise of these basic constitutional rights in their most pristine and classic form. And whereas in the months and years following that victory, civil rights attorneys have relied on the Edwards case to protect the constitutional rights of protesters throughout the country. In Birmingham, Alabama campaign, Bull Hunter's officers arrested Reverend Fred Shuttleworth and other citizens in the 1963 Good Friday parade. But that United States Supreme Court ruling following the Edwards case made it clear that such demonstrations were entitled to First Amendment protections. So whereas on Sunday, March 10, 1963, in a jubilant event, about 80 original protesters returned to Mother Zion Baptist Church to celebrate their Supreme Court victory. The Reverend Adequincy Newman said, "While we have won, we march again and again and again until the equality of man is recognized." So be it resolved that the South Carolina House of Representatives and the South Carolina Senate, that the members by this resolution recognize and honor the courageous, path-breaking students and leaders who marched on the State House 60 long years ago on March 2nd, 1961, setting the stage for the landmark Edwards versus South Carolina United States Supreme Court ruling that helps protect our constitutional rights today, and be it resolved that a copy of this resolution be provided to Columbia SC 63 and the University of South Carolina Center for Civil Rights, History, and Research. Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, Representative Robinson Simpson. Also, Representative Pat Hennigan, who is the chair of the South Carolina Black Caucus, thank you as well. And all members of the General Assembly for being with us today and taking time from your legislative schedule to be here. 60 years ago, students from high schools and colleges gathered on the grounds of the State House. The vast majority were African American. But there were some white supporters and sympathizers, including one young man whose name was Frederick Hart. Frederick Hart was a 17-year-old white student on the campus of the University of South Carolina. He had quietly been going to interracial meetings around Columbia. On March 2nd, 1961, Frederick Hart was on the corner of Sumter and Gervais Street when he saw what was happening. And a policeman looks at him and says, are you a member of the NAACP? And Frederick Hart says, yes, I just joined. And he goes to jail with those young men and women in 1961. And if you go to the Columbia SC 63 website, you will see video footage of Frederick Hart in jail with students from Benedict College. Others who joined him that day included a young woman who then was a student at Dreher High School. She was a strong supporter. She was on the grounds that day, and no one ever imagined that that young student would become the first female Chief Justice of the South Carolina Supreme Court. To share with you her perspectives of that moment and this legal victory, I'm pleased to welcome my friend, retired Chief Justice Jean Toll.
The year was 1961, and despite decisions of the United States Supreme Court prohibiting segregation in public education, rigid segregation in public accommodations and public education was still enforced in South Carolina by state and local law. A movement of black South Carolina high school and college students was organizing to challenge segregation laws. A small group of white students was beginning to meet with their black counterparts through an interfaith council to oppose segregation. We learned about Mahatma Gandhi's principles of nonviolence as a way of changing unjust laws. In March of 1961, 200 black students rallied on the State House grounds to protest state segregation laws. State and city law enforcement were present in large numbers. Students and ministers numbering 187 were arrested by city policemen and marched to the City of Columbia jail. The charges were simple breach of peace, but the stakes were much higher. The demonstrators were prosecuted in the Richland County Courthouse by deputy state attorney generals. I attended several sessions of those trials with a few Interfaith Council friends to show our sympathy with the student demonstrators. There, I first encountered attorney Matthew J. Perry, who with attorneys Lincoln C. Jenkins and Donald Sampson represented the demonstrators. The courtroom was jammed with students, law enforcement officials, lawyers, reporters, the curious, the mean-spirited. The judge was civil but deeply unsympathetic. The atmosphere was charged with animosity towards the demonstrators and hostility towards their challenge to segregation. A hush fell over the courtroom as Matthew Perry spoke his opening words on behalf of the students. He was an imposing figure, tall, slender, conservatively and impeccably dressed, with a deep melodious voice. His command of the language was a thing of beauty. His command of the law was complete and powerful. He quickly and successfully objected to much of the state's opening witness testimony. The state witnesses had to concede that the students were orderly, did not curse, did not threaten, did not block the public streets. They marched and sang patriotic and religious hymns such as America the Beautiful and the hymn which became the Civil Rights Movement's anthem, We Shall Not Be Moved. The state's case for breach of the peace rested on the alleged threat to public safety which the hostile onlookers posed and speculation as to what the students might do in response. Attorney Perry doggedly objected to attempts to introduce hearsay evidence intended to suggest that public safety was somehow compromised by the rumored threats of those opposed to the students. Onlookers at the court were amazed when Attorney Perry obtained several favorable rulings which excluded state-offered evidence. He skillfully attacked the charges both on the basis of the state's failure to prove the students had breached the peace, but also on the very important ground that the students' First Amendment, freedom of speech, freedom of association, and freedom to petition their government for redress of grievances had been violated. The students were convicted, but Attorney Perry laid the foundation in the trial record which allowed the United States Supreme Court to reverse, and in Edwards versus South Carolina, the court broke new ground by holding that even if students were found to have technically, quote, breached the peace, they were convicted upon evidence which showed no more than the opinions they were expressing were sufficiently opposed to the views of the majority of the community to attract a crowd and necessitate police protection. That's a quote from the Supreme Court decision. In overturning those convictions, the court found the state's prosecution was an attempt to suppress the students' constitutionally protected right to protest state-enforced segregation. The importance of a First Amendment civil rights decision, and this was the very first. The precedent of the time was a civil rights demonstration from 1950 where a student at Syracuse University was arrested and jailed for quite some time for a similar protest against segregation. We had had some civil rights cases, including the famed Brown versus the Board of Education, its predecessor Briggs versus Elliott from this state, that relied upon the 14th Amendment, that relied upon civil rights guarantees, but we had not had a decision that rested on the First Amendment as a protection for the expression of views to end segregation. This was the seminal event that protected so many demonstrations in the future, one of which Representative Robinson Simpson has outlined in the resolution that she put forth. So it cannot be overstated the importance of what Matthew Perry did to set the foundation for what the Supreme Court decided in that case. And as a young student, I was here to observe. They were too scared to let us high school students particularly us white high school students, march. They said, you're going to instigate a riot if you do that. And boy, the people that were surrounding us were saying all kinds of terrible things, as you might imagine. They were the ones breaching the peace, not the demonstrators. But history was made that day by those brave students and by that brave attorney, Matthew Perry, and now we've come to full fruition of a very deep recognition in our society of the importance of free expression of opinion, even against a majority view, and the importance of the protection by the courts of these rights. Let us hope we continue to build for the future.
Thank you very much, Chief Justice. 60 years ago, a long list of names were called in the Columbia City jails, city courts. Recently, that list of those arrested was discovered in the arrest records of Columbia City Police and the Richland Sheriff's Office. Those names can be found online in the local reading room of the Richland Library, where all that has been digitized. When you look at the list, you will see some names such as Miss Yvonne Red Martin, who is here today. Would you please stand? You will see a name, Felicia Young, Miss Felicia Young Trower, who's with us today. You will see a name, Shirley Caldwell Pride, who's with us today. You will see the name of Doris D. Wright, D.D. Wright, who's with us today. I'm scanning this audience to make sure I'm not missing anyone. You'll also see the name Reverend David Carter. When the Columbia 63 project began, Reverend Carter had passed away only months before, and we were very pleased to connect with his family. And I'm very pleased that his son and grandchildren are here today with the Carter family. Please stand. Of those arrested, the person who had the stiffest fine, of those arrested who had the longest stay in jail, was a 21-year-old student from Greenwood, South Carolina. He was arrested for a breach of peace and contributing to the delinquency of minors, including a minor named Leola Clement. It's been a long time coming that we come here today to acknowledge all of those in Edwards versus South Carolina, including that 21-year-old young man, the Reverend James Edwards Jr. Reverend Edwards, would you please come forward?
I come out of the one who sent me here, but I didn't come of myself. 60 years ago, when I came to Benedict College, not knowing that I was going to be in a movement which was called the Civil Rights Movement, as well as today. When I met the late Dr. Reverend Quincy Newman that came to speak at Tisdale College in behalf of the Civil Rights Movement, I was so in tune and so excited about what he was saying at the time that I couldn't be still. And a lot of times when he was talking, I would get up. And at the end of his speech and all, he said, "Where are you from, young man?" I said, "I'm from a little town called 96, South Carolina in Greenwood County." He said, "I can use a man like you. You don't seem like you a man that's scared." I said, "No, but for what?" So the essence of it is I joined that day to start in the march in the Civil Rights Movement. And what so happened is that the atmosphere at that time it was strange how the atmosphere, I'm just going to speak it in my words, you could just feel God was in that movement, because without him, we would have not made it. See, when Jesus died, when he left here, he said he's going to leave a comforter for us. The comforter is the Holy Spirit that guides us through. And it was hard at the time, because a lot of times I felt that I could have gotten killed, but I still had to do it. And I thank God for being a part of the civil rights movement. I thank God for Rosa Parks, that she sat down and she wouldn't get up, so we would be able to sit down. I thank God for the Reverend late Dr. Martin Luther King, which was a black prophet, which we served under at that time, and the late Dr. Reverend Quincy Newman, the president of the NAACP, and at that time. But I always felt that it's something that I had to do, and that's why God led me to Benedict College, and I'm so glad that I was able to come to school. And after I graduated from Benedict College, I went to Augusta, Georgia, and I'm a retired teacher. At that time from Augusta, Georgia, I retired as a school teacher. And I just want to thank God for each and every one of you here today, and to our mayor and Dr. Donaldson, who put this program together. Thank you all. May God bless you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Edwards, and we're very pleased to have the Edwards family. Would you raise your hand? We're here today. Not on your program, but an important addition today before we hear from our musical guests. Miss Nia Bias is a student at Benedict College. She is a native of Columbia, a graduate of the Spring Valley High School. She is an active member of the NAACP on the campus of Benedict College. And I thought it was absolutely fitting and proper today, as we honor students from 60 years ago, we hear a word from a student today to talk about the significance of this moment. So Ms. Nia Bias of Benedict College, please come forward.
Thank you. I bring greetings on behalf of our president, Dr. Rosalind Clark Artis, our students, faculty, staff, and alumni. I just want to thank those Benedict Tigers, Allen Yellow Jackets, SC State Bulldogs, and USC Gamecocks for paving the way over 60 years ago for this movement. We stand on your shoulders and thank you for your resilience and bravery, and I am so proud to be a part of this historic day. Thank you.
As we prepare for our historical marker unveiling and the unveiling of our historical monument, I'm very pleased to invite one of Columbia's leading artists, Mr. Terence Henderson, who is the artistic director and founding member of Indigo Soul, a soul music trio dedicated to using song, story, and conversation as a healing device through performances, residencies, and workshops. Those young men and women 60 years ago were arrested for singing freedom songs. What did they sing that day? I've asked Terence Henderson to put his creative talents together to remind us of what transpired on those grounds 60 years ago. So please welcome Terence Henderson and Indigo Soul.
Lord, we done had an accident. We'll just turn that off.
Oh, say.
to. Oh, say, can you see?
By the dawn's early light,
What so proudly we hailed,
at the twilight's last gleam,
whose broad stripes and bright stars
through the perilous fight, o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streamed, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
We shall not be moved.
We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved.
Oh, we're fighting for our children.
We shall not be moved. Fighting for our children. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved.
Oh, we ain't going nowhere.
We shall not be moved. We ain't going nowhere. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall not be moved.
Oh, we shall not.
We shall not be moved. We shall not be moved, just like a tree that's planted by the water. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Whoa, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
We'll walk hand in hand.
We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand. We'll walk hand in hand today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe We are not afraid. We are not afraid. We are not afraid today. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we are not afraid today.
We shall live in peace.
We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe we shall walk in peace someday. Oh, we shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart,
You know,
I do believe that we shall overcome someday.
Indigo Soul, thank you so much. So we've come to the hour why many gather here. Today we're unveiling a historical state marker. I want to thank the South Carolina Department of Archives and History for their work on doing this. We also will unveil a historical monument carved by master stone carver Ron Clamp of West Columbia. I especially would like to thank the Drip Coffee Shop for their support in funding this particular monument. And we also dedicate today a public art installation at 1607 Main, outside the doors of the Nickelodeon Theater. Award-winning sculptor Jerome Meadows was commissioned to do a piece called Speaking Truth to Power. We invite you to take a look at that installation as well. This event would not have been possible without the work of a number of partners. We would like to thank the Historic Columbia organization who's been with us from the very beginning. I especially would like to thank Mayor Steve Benjamin and the City of Columbia, the Assistant Administrator Henry Simons, Mr. Randy Davis, who worked with us even in the middle of the night to make this event happen. Thank you very much. I want to thank also my colleagues at the University of South Carolina, our communications team, the Department of Information and Technology. I want to especially thank everyone who worked well beyond the call of duty in the Center for Civil Rights History and Research, and all of those with Columbia SC 63. Thank you for what you've done. I want to now invite all of those who came up this hill in 1961, and all of those who came down Main Street in 1961 to please join us here for the unveiling of the state historical marker and then the unveiling of the monument. And I also want to invite the family of the Reverend David Carter to join us as well. Now, I want you to come a little closer toward the monument. So Reverend Edwards and Reverend Simpson, if you would help us do the honors of untying this knot here. Reverend Edwards, you stand right here, okay? And Mr. Mayor, I want you to come forward as well. Okay. The mayor said he'll replant the grass, okay? Representative Simpson, would you just pull it down for me? So this installation is entitled, "We Shall Not Be Moved." And I want to say one word that I had a vision about this, and my team quickly got to work to figure out what we could do in the short amount of time that we had. And I want to again thank Ron Clamp for what he did to make this possible. This is a temporary space for this. The mayor and I are working to find a permanent home that will have a visible place in the city of Columbia. This sign that just went up, the marker, there's a word count limit. We can only put a few names on that marker, but we wanted to make sure every name was recorded. Now, who's the youngest Carter here today? What's her name? Kenzie. This is Reverend Carter's granddaughter. So Kenzie Carter. So I want Kenzie to pull this white cord for me. Can I easily pull? Okay. Now, who's the other Carter granddaughter? Can you help me untie this one? Okay. All right. Now pull that on off. Now. Okay, very good. Now I need to do the most important part. Can you just pull this down for me? Pull that down. Okay, and then pull it out the way. Wow. Pull it out the way. Okay. We shall not be moved.
It's all right now. All right.
Yes, sir. Reverend Edwards just asked me, was his name on it? Absolutely. His name is on it. Someone, if you can find it, let me know. Right here. Now, these are the names that were in the arrest record. So some people, this is your given first name, not the name you go by. Thanks to everyone who's joined us today virtually, including some other participants from the Edwards March.